Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Always trouble with this.
Trying to figure out what was going on.
Sorry for that.
That's fine.
Okay, so your question was, are you ready? Well, ready as can be.
Now you are. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Michaëla. The floor is yours.
Yes. All right. Welcome everybody. Thanks for choosing this track. So the Agile and Business track. Glad to be here. Let me see. I made some slides just to give you some visuals as well, not just my talking. And I'm wondering, you probably see the right screen now. Yes, can you see my first slide, hands-on agile transformation?
Yes, looks good.
Thank you. All right, so well, I'm an agile coach for a unit that you all know, of course, within Ordina. It's called JWorks. And as an agile coach, I feel I'm very much into the business of healthcare at the moment. So just to say that when I say health, the first thing we think of is the human perspective. We say the people factor. We think of medical sciences. We think of hospitals and doctors. We think of, I don't know, protein diets, doing exercises. But I feel that our organizations today also need some healthcare treatments now and again. Of course, environments and organizations are, of course, an environment in which we work. They have a huge impact on people. And I think agility is about healthcare. So let me explain that further. I was wondering, an organization, do we see this as an organism or not? So in my opinion, we haven't done that enough in the past. And I think it's a good idea to reflect a bit on that. An organism, why would it be important to see an organization as an organism? It's an entity that lives and that breathes on its own. That's, let's say, the definition of an organism. It's something that can grow, that can improve. And I think its health and its ability to survive depends also on how well the organs, let's say your body is the organism, how well the organs are working. So if we use that metaphor, we can do a lot with it. If we see our organizations as organisms, we can try to, draw some parallels between our bodies or any organism that we know and our organizations. So if we look at Ordina, and you could say that every employee within Ordina is a cell of the body, then what would the other things be? So let's say, what would a team be? You can always suggest something in the chat. So a cross-functional team would be maybe an organ, right, in the body. And if we extrapolate from there, what would be the JWorks unit within the body? Any ideas? Please give them to me in the chat. Let me see if I can. Oh, I can't see the chat at the moment. I don't know. If there is somebody who has an idea, you can always shout out as well. Okay, so the unit maybe could be, let's say, the respiratory system. Yeah. So you have these different sizes that you can use, and let the metaphor help you to see an organization as an organism. Well, I'm just wondering, so if we see it as an organism, we could discuss health, right? So my question to you all is first, how healthy are you? And when we speak of health, there's a lot of things that have to do with good habits, healthy habits, maybe some bad habits that you want to get rid of. So I would like to know from you, what have you tried so far to get healthier, to be more fit? And I made a Menti for that. So the menti.com, you also use it in the previous session with Marisa and Edwin. So if you go to www.menti.com, I can give you the code to go into that. Work out. The code, I can put it. It would be great. For me, it would be fine if you all just unmute yourselves. I don't know about you guys, but I'd like to have some more interaction. I'd like to hear some more from you.
Okay, sure.
Thank you so much.
You can hear me, Michaëla.
What a relief. Okay, so the code is in there. So just go to menti.com and give in the code. And I will start. I see some things popping up already.
Would you feel, Michaëla, like sharing your Menti slides again? Because then we can see the results as well, I think.
Share my presentation. I'm going to share what I'm seeing here. So what habit have you tried to create to be more healthy? Bumpy challenge. I guess that would be a bungee challenge. I don't know. Something I have never heard of. Miracle morning. Going to the gym. Wow. So many.
I meant burpee challenge, Michaëla.
Which one?
I meant burpee challenge, not burpee.
Okay, Edwin, even more weird. Okay. Intermittent fasting, yeah, interesting. Running, yoga with my wife. Oh yes. Now the with my wife is an interesting part. It's an addition. Having a vacation, why not? Doing some CrossFit. The food always works for me as well. Motorcycling, well, good. Okay. Next question. If I get the hang of my screens, where is my Menti? I'm getting a bit lost in the tools here. Okay. Edwin, do you know the trick to go to the next slide if you're presenting?
Yeah, I was just going to say the bottom left hand. There you are. Yeah.
What helps you to stick to that new habit? Please give me some input. I see Corona. Well, so there's some environmental aspects that can help you. Repeating it, absolutely. Repetition. Being monitored by others, yes. Knowing that I'm getting old. All right. Commitment to someone else. Yes, so peer pressure, kind of. The scale, yes. Showing you measures. Force of will, some grit, some spit, and all the rest. Right. So yes, I see some interesting stuff here. Things that we basically all know, you know. It's much easier to get into a new habit and stick to it if you do it long enough, if you repeat it enough. If it's not too difficult, if you have some peer pressure, if you have somebody coaching you, somebody helping you, somebody monitoring you. So all this we quite, you know, understand pretty well, I think. So now let's have a look how this could be relevant to our organizational environments. Let me share my other screen again. And that should be good, right. So, organization and organism. Let's build it up from here. So if our organization is an organism, we could try to see how a good habit could be formed within our organization. right? We could also see that we have some bad habits. I'm sure you have some bad habits as well. Could be anything: smoking, drinking, getting to bed too late, watching too many screens. So there's some good ones, some bad ones. Maybe we should replace the old ones with the new ones, right? And how could that work? In an organization, of course, you have different layers. You have the employees, you have the team, you have the company. The managers are somewhere around, all over the place. And there's a lot of procedures, a lot of, processes and tools around. So all that together, right? And there's, of course, the environment having an impact on all of us and on the entire entity. How healthy is a company? You could ask yourself, right? The company, maybe Ordina, maybe another company, the company you work for, where your daily work is at the moment. So try to figure that environment and put that in your mind. Let's have a look at some research that has been done. Well, McKinsey has done a study and had took a look at some companies, and 70% apparently of agile companies, they rank in the top quartile of organizational health. Now that is if you see health as a combination of speed and stability. And then you see indeed that companies who call themselves agile, I'm not saying anything about whether they are agile, but they call themselves agile and they rank at the top ones. So that's interesting to know, right? So an agile company is apparently an indicator of a healthy organization. So what does it take to be an agile company? Now, there's been research by the Business Agility Institute, and they say that 79% of companies have low business agility. Yeah? And the average business agility maturity is 4.4, which is rather mediocre, right? Now, the perception about business agility differs a lot depending on who you ask, right? So the C-level tends to rate it higher than the employees, for instance, or the external partners, and so forth and so on. Now, there is a few themes, of course, that keep coming back. Some organizations say, why is it difficult? We want to be agile. We want to become agile companies, but we are, always bumping into some trouble here. So the biggest themes, or the themes that come back most often, are leadership style, management, change management, and the culture in companies. It will always be a good idea to measure things from the start. So if you have a look at measuring tools and you see, okay, what is agility and what defines agility, then you see that, for instance, Health Radar has a nice set of aspects on which they rate companies. Now, I don't want to discuss all of them. Of course, leadership and culture is a very important one, and I think we can all agree on the fact that it's something that is often missing or not being, developed enough. But the one that I would like to discuss with you is this one: how to make it stick, right? So, agile transformation or adoption, or whichever way you want to call it, it's something that very often is done by a whole bunch of external people coming in, like a troop, giving training, lots of training, trying to coach people on a short term. And then when the money is gone, they are sent away again. And then, of course, the question is, did it stick? So looking at an organization as an organism and seeing how could we create habits that stick, maybe even getting away with old ones and taking on the new ones instead. How would we then do that? So my question for you again is, which persistent shall we tackle? I would love you to maybe just a minute think about what in your organization at the moment, in your working environment, is a habit that you would like to get away with. And feel free to put anything in the chat. I would like to have at least one from each one of you. That would be so interesting for us to see which ones are top of mind for you. So which bad habits are very persistent and would you like to tackle? Please give us some chat here. One is coming, oh yes, I see a few here. Occupational burnout, meetings without a clear purpose, micromanagement, long meetings, yes. Lack of priority, yes, absolutely. Openness that would lead to trust. I guess that's a habit you would like to take on. Fear of vulnerability, yes. Yes, okay. Another stage gate when things go wrong. Yep. Habit of going back to old habits. That's a good one. How to get rid of it. All right. Interesting. I'm gonna put this back open. Let me see. Can you still see my screen? Presentation mode?
Yes.
All right.
Not in presentation mode.
Ah, that's it. Okay, that's what I thought. So, a whole lot of things that you would love to tackle, right? Now, if we did a small survey, and there's a few things that really come, up again and again, which basically point towards a mindset structure misfit. The structure being the environment, the processes that you use, the procedures that are, widely known, and the mindset of people. So a few of those I just want to present to you, and because this is a JWorks conference, of course, I focus on IT development teams a little bit. So many of these things are actually anti-patterns of what we come across in the working environment of these development teams. For instance, all kinds of things. Teams are busy doing stories, but things there's no customer releases, so not enough go lives. Customers don't really feel or see the value quick enough, for instance, right? Then putting pressure on the work itself, so optimize for work instead of focusing on value, really. You go for velocity and resource efficiency. So things like that. It's things that keep coming back and that we see in many environments, and mainly also in the IT development environment. The question is, how do we make sure that slowly, gradually, we will create the right habits to get back on track to agility, right? How to effectively transform as an enterprise? So that's the real question here. Yeah. Going back to this image, so there's different layers that we can tackle. Yeah, and the environmental pressures are something that you can start with, trying to map these out and make sure that you have a good view on what is impacting the organization. Going further, I also want to mention that it's not really about Agile. I mean, it is more about people, right? We have to acknowledge that. Because it's really important to see that everything we do, well, when we see our organization as an organism, it's basically a bunch of cells together. And when people are the cells, if one cell is bad, things can go very wrong, depending on how strong that cell is and whether it can really make things bad for the bigger parts, the teams, the departments, and stuff like that. So it's really all about the people. And we have to acknowledge that. Now, believe it or not, people are very biased. I can speak for myself, and I'm sure that you know as well, that humans are very biased. It's not a choice that we make, it just happens over time, We've evolved into biased creatures, let's say, right? There's a few biases I would like to present to you. Some of them very short, like the effect bias, the availability bias, the attribution bias. To give maybe some short explanation on all of them. So the attribution bias, for instance, it's like the moment you say, okay, when I'm on my phone, it's important, but when my daughter is on her phone, it should be family time, right? She should put it down. So that's the attribution bias. We're all guilty on that, The availability bias, for instance, it's the one that is applied when, for instance, we always go on the most recent information. Let's say in the news, the last thing you see, that's what you go for. So it feels like crime is everywhere, right? because it's being reported to us daily. Yeah, that's the availability bias. Whatever is available, we go for it. And then there's the confirmation bias. That one I would like to discuss a little bit further with you. So confirmation bias, it's when you only believe what suits your own story, right? Now the trouble with confirmation biases is that they really hijack our situational awareness. So what do I believe, right? And how is my belief impacting on how I perceive my situation? Now there's been done a lot of study, on this. A guy called Peter Wason has coined the term confirmation bias. And basically what we need to do is we need to adopt routines to create better situational awareness, to get rid of that bias. Now, bias thinking, to confirm what we believe is true, is something that we all do. For instance, this image, I like it a lot because, you see this triangle in the middle? When you look at it, you think it's there, but you have to admit it's not, right? So this is black on white, and here we can see it clearly, but this is something that we tend to do in complex environments as well, where things are not so black and white. So basically, what I just said, so you have a theory. Actually, what you do is you just look for evidence that supports your theory, right? Now, what we need to do is make things more clear and untangled, just to get this situational awareness, right? We need to make sure we have a clear line of sight, that we know where we're going, where we're heading. We have to agree on the state of affairs and what could be an achievable target towards our goal. And we have to acknowledge that we are never sure what will happen, right? And lastly, we have to navigate our way forward, one step at a time. So actually, when you come to think of it, we have used this somewhere. There is an area, a domain, in which we really do this. And that is because that domain is crucial for our health. It's crucial for our longevity. And it's science. So scientific thinking is really based on this, on disentangling complexity. So what they do in scientific thinking, of course, as you know, is formulating a hypothesis and a deadline, and then defining how you will monitor and how you will measure the steps that you take towards that idea. And every time that you bump onto something that you hadn't expected, then you discuss that and you make it into a learning. So this is something that we actually really know how to do. Scientific thinking is not something that has been invented recently. So it might be the best antidote for any bias that we have. And we know the routine, in fact. Scientific research has been using that routine over and over again. So maybe we can use this routine to navigate complexity in any area or any field, also our organizations. I would like to present to you a routine.
Michaëla, if
Yes?
I must ask, isn't scientific research the field that is most affected by confirmation bias in the entire world?
I would love to hear that, Peter. Tell me, how is it?
It's because scientific research is done by people, and what we have noticed in scientific research that we tend to only publish research that has the positive result, and we never publish research that has the failed result, which means that we immediately come more predisposed into believing the research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, I haven't.
It's a real problem in that field. I mean, we don't know how to fix it, so.
Yeah. Okay, but it's possible that this is going wrong as well there, because we are, after all, just humans. But you have to admit that we know how it should be done. The fact that we tend to formulate a hypothesis, and then, of course, the risk is that we keep looking for stuff that supports our hypothesis. But you need to make sure that whatever you do, there's always peers helping you out, making sure, monitoring you, just like whatever you're trying to do, sticking to a diet or go running every day. You really need coaching and you really need peer pressure. So peer reviews are, of course, key. And I think there's only one area where we actually really do this, and that's in scientific areas. You might be right in the fact that we still do it wrong there as well, but I think we can agree on the fact that we all know how it should be done. So now, what I was actually wanting to show you as well is that there is an organization who has really done that. You know, you see on my screen already Toyota. So Toyota is a really interesting company in that aspect. So I think you know Toyota probably from the TPS, Toyota Production System, which is a management method. And they're really at the basis of developing practices and philosophy of Lean, Kaizen, Kanban. Agile as well actually is based on that philosophy. But there's also something that is more under the radar happening at Toyota. And Mike Rother, whom you see a picture here, he's an American researcher, born in Michigan. He introduced, first of all, value stream mapping. He did some wide research on value stream mapping in Toyota. But he also discovered that there is this routine that people at Toyota tend to use, you know, in their everyday life. And he tried over the years to describe what they were doing. So the routine that he found out is called Kata. Now, they didn't, you know, think of that name themselves. Actually, they didn't have a word for it. They didn't know they were doing it, you know. And I would like to point out here the difference with maybe most of the other organizations. And maybe the top quote is important here. They rely on periodic improvements and innovation alone. Only improving when we make a special effort or campaign conceals a system that is static and vulnerable. So this is not what they're doing. This is the definition of what most people are doing, right? Periodic improvements. Now, the second quote here says non-Toyota thinking means they do normal daily management, and on top of that, they try to improve. Whereas at Toyota, they think differently. They say, look, normal daily management is our process improvement. So they see improvement as the real DNA of their company. That's why there are two pillars on which TPS is always resting, or the Toyota way, as they call it, which is respect for people and continuous improvement. And I think here you really start realizing what we mean with continuous improvement. It's not about, you know, once in a while check on our improvements. No, it means to really build it into our habits, make it a routine, you know. So they really took that to the next level. Kata, I would like to present it to you. It's rather fairly easy. So what Mike Rother discovered when he went about on the floor at the Toyota factory is that they all seem to work with the same routine. And the routine is as follows. They always have a certain direction, a way that they are going. They are heading for a certain direction, a desired outcome, right? So that's number one. A desired outcome that is formulated very clearly, but is always very, very difficult to achieve, or maybe not even achievable, like a North Star. And the second thing they do is they always try to grasp the current condition. So trying to figure out what is the situation on the work floor at the moment, and what do we know about it, you know? And then the next step is looking back at the challenge, looking back at that purpose that you're going for, and see, okay, what could be our first next target condition towards that goal. And so they go for number 3. Together, they look for the next target condition. And once that is clear, for instance, with a team, you can really make iterations. So you do small steps towards your next target condition, knowing that the condition will be a good step ahead towards your purpose. Now, you see that little guy here is taking the steps. These are actually experiments. Every line is an experiment. And when you do an experiment, you do scientific thinking, and you say, okay, let's make a hypothesis. And then this goes, okay, that will be our deadline. And now the first thing to do is, measure. How will we know that we are reaching our goal? How will we know? How can we measure that our hypothesis is true or not true? So that's something that you always do for every experiment. And then you start experimenting. And of course, you run into obstacles. That's what happens. And it's also very important to know that you can never know what is going to happen. You see these dotted lines. That's what they call the knowledge threshold. So you cannot see much further than maybe 2 experiments far, and even that is a lot. So there's a certain threshold that we have. We cannot imagine what goes beyond that. So using that scientific method is exactly what they do. So for every experiment, they formulate a hypothesis and they start experimenting towards the deadline and then see when they run into obstacles. And of course, learning happens when reality hits you. So these obstacles are really opportunities for learning. And like this, they get closer and closer to their target. And when you iterate with that, think of a next target condition and the next one again, you learn on the way and you get closer to your challenge. So this is the Kata routine for improvement that they are using. So the scientific way of thinking, if you do it over and over again towards your next target condition, you build up a lot of knowledge that should not be lost. So you have to make a standard of everything that you learn. So I borrowed this slide from Michaëla Broeckx and the next one as well. I thought this was interesting. It says here's where we traditionally make the plan. And that's true, right? Because this is where we are, the current condition. We formulate number 1, we try to grasp number 2, and then we make our plan. That's what we traditionally do. We make our plan and we start rolling out, or implementing. So the twist is here in the fact that we should not see it as a plan. We should not see it as a rollout or an implementation. Even a roadmap sounds too heavy, because what we should be talking about is conducting experiments together. Now, how can we stick to this new routine? That's the thing, of course, right? We are so used to work in our normal way, to have our confirmation bias, which is rather cozy at times. So how do we make it stick? How do we make this new routine stick? And at Toyota, they use templates for that. Michaëla Broeckx in his books has also given a few that we can just use. It's fairly easy. The fact is, you just try to write all these numbers. Number 1 is on the top right, it's the challenge. Number 2 is the current condition, it's in the middle. Number 3 was the target condition, it's on the left. You try to fill the box there. And then you start experimenting. And for that, they use the PDCA cycle. I think PDCA was mentioned in the previous talk as well. I saw it in the chat. It's basically how Toyota does their experiments, time and time again, trying to do the PDCA cycle. And everything that you run into, you try to note down in your obstacles parking lot. It's not more than that. It's just the fact that you think about things, that you note them down, and that you discuss and learn. It's something that we are not used to anymore. So a second thing, I wanted to zoom in on this as well. The PDCA cycles are fairly easy to do as well. So basically what you do is you write the date and the step and your metric. So how will we measure that we get closer to our next target condition? What do we expect? So it's interesting to know that beforehand you write down what you expect, and then you start your PDCA cycle, and afterwards you just write down what actually happens and see the gap between what you had expected, because that defines what you learned. It seems easy, right? But it needs a new habit, the habit of noting things down and discussing this with others as a team, going for your next target condition. As I told in the beginning, it's also about ditching our old habits, right? It's not just taking up new ones. So how do we ditch our old habits, the ones that you came to list in the chat? I think it's important that we see these obstacles that contradict our beliefs, because that's our bias, right? We also need to treat these as a learning and set that as a new standard. The new things that we learn, we have to make sure that we spread them, throughout our company, throughout the team. And then we need to stick to it long enough to raise the old habits. Now, I don't know if you know what long enough is. Now, if you try to create a new habit like running or a diet or no sugar or I don't know what, how long do you have to keep it up? Does anyone know that?
In itself becomes a bad habit and you have to replace it with another habit?
Yes, and that you can, how can you monitor that? That's a good one. Well, they say there's a certain amount of days, right? 21 days at least, you should try to stick to it, and then hopefully you can go from there. So it's 21 days. I don't know who came up with that. I should figure that out as well. But it's not such a long time. It should be doable. On the other hand, if you have tried it with, for instance, no sugar, it's not that easy, Some old habits are really sticky. So the idea is to replace them with new ones that give us the same benefits. That's not an easy thing to do, but it might help us understand why it's so difficult, for instance, for a management level or a C-level to adopt new ways of working. Because what's in it for them is, of course, the numbers and the reporting and the data. So we have to make sure that they can still have the benefits of all those things. Whereas you replace the old habit of doing reporting that nobody knows why with something new, So it's something good to think about. Changing old habits for new ones is something that is not easy to do. Now, some examples might be good for you. I don't know. I just listed a few that could have some could be, inspiring examples for you. Let's see. It could be for any team. I would like to say that first. So I was talking about development teams, but it could be an HR team, could be any cross-functional team, could be a management team. You can use this Kata routine with every team and everyone, right? For development teams, it could look like this. So it could be a challenge. Number one, remember the 4 numbers. Number one could be, for instance, okay, our IT processes are not optimal to efficiently create value. So that's our challenge. It's always good to also formulate the desired outcome. For instance, we want reduced time to market and quicker customer feedback, right? Sounds okay with you guys? This is something that we could do experiments on. Number 2 was to describe the current condition, right? So the process as it is. So how do we work at the moment? And then try to see whether there's some patterns that you can observe. These patterns are really important to know, right? Because that helps you to grasp the current condition. And then the team themselves, they have to set the next target condition. For instance, could be, let's try some semi-continuous deployment and possible release on demand. Doesn't sound easy, right? But the thing is, they don't have to know how it's gonna be from there. The only thing they need to do is get the habit of the scientific thinking. So just do some Kata experiments, right? Using the templates. Being coached, of course, also helps. Peer pressure and coaching, as we said in the beginning. And some possible experiments could be, for instance, to map the process, right? Another experiment could be to detect the slowest process step and try to measure the lead time per step, for instance. A next experiment could be to define the steps for test data anonymization process. So all these things, I'm just listing a few here, but it depends on the team who is doing the experiments. They have to come up with the next thing based on what they learned from a previous experiment and the obstacles they ran into. So that's the idea, right? Is there anyone who has questions about the Kata improvement routine or how this could work in an organization?
Well, not surprisingly, I have a question, Michaëla.
My confirmation bias is not contradicted here, Peter.
Now, just to ask, the kata seems to be you focus on the steps which you want to improve, or the habits which you want to improve in order for your process to become more performant. Is there a way to detect at which point that you're just changing things in the margins and the effort that you're putting in is no longer giving you any adequate additional result, and that you have to decide, okay, it's not the habits that are the problem, but the entire process is broken and we need to radically change from the bottom up?
Well,
because everything you say here, it works on spot optimization. You target specific parts of your process and you try to optimize those. But at a certain moment, that no longer works, and you need to just throw away your process and design a new process that is more efficient.
Mm-hmm. But that could be an experiment. It doesn't have to be an improvement on the existing one. You can say, look, let's map out a new process and see whether that one will work better for us.
Yeah, okay, but that's a pretty radical change to the way you're doing things. Is there a way to detect at which point you want to go for that? And you say, okay, we're noticing that our spot optimizations are no longer working. We need to look at the process in a whole.
I think it all depends on how much your team has a good line of sight and how they have a bigger picture as well. So maybe I didn't stress that enough, but every team that does Kata always needs a coach, and the coach is not an external, it's not an agile coach from Ordina, it's actually a coach within the company, and that coach is supposed to be someone who can really change things. So somebody who has a bigger picture, somebody who has a mandate to be able to really change things, is somebody who can effectively coach a Kata team. So you're right in a way that, you said yourself bottom up, and definitely this is a technique that you can use for bottom up, but not without leadership support. So leadership is very important when it comes to setting that goal, well, that number one.
Yeah, sorry, bottom up was the wrong expression. I meant from the ground up. Just
okay, so like
from a blank page
down and then build something new.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, who am I to say? I mean, it's in the learning, and the learning is with the people. I mean, you can never really say beforehand, look, in the end, we're going to have to, erase everything. There's only the cost, of course. You can always measure cost. And if you're not getting closer or close enough to your target, you might ask yourself, are we heading the right way? Right? So you could set yourself a certain deadline or threshold, to say, look, if it doesn't work by then, we will think of something else. It's a good question. But it's not for me to decide. It's for the group to decide.
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe there were techniques that were available for that.
No, not that I know. But it's a good question.
All right.
Anyone
Thank
else?
you, Peter.
Let me see.
We're already past time, but I'm not sure if anybody has an urgent question. Very urgent question. Staying quiet, but I'm sure that Michaëla is available for any questions later on.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Michaëla, for that wonderful presentation. We learned a lot. The chat was also very lively, so Michaëla, if you would like to check it later on, might be interesting for you as well. Yes. So what's up next? At 3:20, Anke Maers will present her presentation on failure culture, what it means to fail and how we can get value from it. In the meantime, Kevin will host a small Kahoot quiz in the tech track. So if anybody is interested in joining, you may switch the meeting. Thank you very much for joining, everyone. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks, Michaëla.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Michaëla.
Yeah, thanks, Michaëla.